Hi everyone. So I'm having a non-typical topic for a Flutter thing, I think. So I'm going to talk a bit about hosting. It's a bit of a prequel talk to the talk of Brent that's coming a bit later. We had to host a backend on the cloud, and then typically want to show you things you should think about when you want to host a backend for an enterprise company inside the cloud. So a bit about me. I've experienced designing cloud architectures for both really small companies but also large companies. I have experience in both software and architecture, in infrastructure, sorry. So I started actually a while ago as both a backend developer and also doing infrastructure. After a while I decided to focus primarily on infrastructure, but I use a lot of things I learned in the past in translating that to development teams. So what I also do is support my clients and dev teams in adopting the cloud, explaining the principles of how it works, how it's different from, for example, hosting your own server. And my specialization is in Microsoft Azure. So what makes your cloud hosting enterprise ready? I have some recommendations. So first of all, containerization is a really interesting one. So it's with Serverpod, for example, it comes out of the box. But what's important is that your container is immutable. This means that you don't save the state inside the container itself. So for example, if you have environment variables, they shouldn't be inside of your image. But as well, if you stop your image, delete it, and run it again, there shouldn't be a state kept inside the image that needs to be separate. So you have to think about where you store files, so you don't store it in a container, you store it somewhere different. Keep the base image as light as possible. So you always see at the top, it's using Dart 3.5.2, for example. It's important that the base image that you use, that this is as small as possible, because if it's very large, it can contain more possibilities for security vulnerabilities, because it usually contains a kernel of that needed to run Dart, for example. But you can also, you could say, I'm not using Dart, but I'm using full Ubuntu, for example, as my base image, and you install Dart on that, for example. But then you can have, if there's a vulnerability in Ubuntu, your container is also impacted. So you always want to keep that as small as possible. Multi-stage builds, that's what you also see here. So you see it starts from Dart, but then it goes to an Alpine. So it separates the compile and the actual rendering of the application into two separate pieces. This keeps your image much smaller. Otherwise, it needs to keep the full compilation. Also use versions. Always easy to revert back to a specific version. And think about containers in layers. So each time you add a line, you add a layer. So if you have multiple images, it's always interesting that you can reuse different layers to take down the build time. Then the next one, infrastructure as code. So everything you create in the cloud, also write it in code. Why should you do this? I know. What's important when writing infrastructure as code is to use modules. This allows you to quickly add or remove environments. and also add abstraction. So there is a lot of resources that created behind the hood, but for an end user, creating this is much more lightweight. Also, you can do code reviews. We use Terraform, for example. We use it because it's a language that is used for multiple cloud providers, but also other solutions, like, for example, you can have, for example, Dynamics, Microsoft Fabric. So these are typically not really cloud providers, but you can also use this language to program. Then a gateway and a WAF. So you put this in front of your application. Why? You want to limit the incoming points where a person could enter your application or your database, for example. You want to limit the attack surface, like they call it. You want to have a certain entry. You also, what's a good advantage of using a WAF is you can limit traffic from certain countries. For example, if you have an application that's specifically for the government in Belgium, you maybe only want it to be available in Belgium, and you don't want it to be available in other countries. You also get reporting on possible threats that are happening against your environment. Also, if there's an attack happening, you can block them on the firewall level, which prevents if a person attacks directly, let's say your application, you can't block them directly, so what could cause your application to crash, and if there is limitations to the application, that could cause corruption, for example, in the database. So you want to prevent that at front. Also, using a gateway, it provides that you can replace the backend that's running behind it. You can also do complex routing capabilities and also limit the cost during attacks. That's maybe the most important one. If you, for example, use a function that says like every execution it costs 0.1 cent. If a bot is attacking it, that price can go really high. So if you have a WAF blocking, for example, a bot, you can prevent like a crazy spike in consumption which could cause a very high cost. Then logging and metrics, of course. So now for the full stack, the Serverpod story, we used Serverpod Insights, but we're looking in the future to change this. Why? Typically, we want to trigger alerts on specific metrics and logs and dispatch this to the correct team. You want alerting to be proactive and sent to your developers, and not when somebody says there is a problem, then you start looking at the logs, but then that the alerting already knows that there's stuff going wrong. Also that you can scale based on metrics. So depending if you have an application where the load is very high in the morning, you can scale the application up, and if it's nobody's using it at night, you can scale it all the way down. An interesting technology at Rise at logging, I want to go into depth, is OpenTelemetry, but this provides that you can have different kind of input data sources to collect your logs and metrics, and you can also push them out to different kind of platforms, which is interesting if you have a lot of different clients that have different types of logging platforms. The logging inside your application will remain the same, but you can provide a solution to the end customer that you can just plug in and don't have to write logging in 10 different ways. So it's much easier. Sampling and data retention. So this is how long do you keep your logs, and what's the log level, for example. If you start collecting debug logs and keeping those, that can become very costly. So you want to set a certain rate of how long data should be kept and what data should be kept. And then, of course, some clients require auditing for GDPR reasons. So then it's also important that you keep that data somewhere safe. Secret management, or maybe go quickly over this one. So it's important to have no secrets inside your CI/CD or inside your repos, but it's best to keep them inside a vault. In Azure, for example, we use an Azure Key Vault. Benefits are that you can replace a secret. I rotate them. So what I mean with this is, if, for example, a certain certificate is expiring, you can already add a new version inside the solution, and it will automatically replace them. So it will prevent any downtime. So you can easily replace a secret or certificate even before the previous one is expiring. And also you can limit who can access it. So for example, it will, for the Serverpod, we have certain secrets that only the application can access and nothing else. So, and then FinOps, so hosting on the cloud, it's important that you know certain principles, otherwise your cloud expense can be very high. One of them is reservation, so reserving your compute saves you a lot of money. Also, scale towards usage. Like if you know there's nothing running at night, scale it down. If you know you have high peaks in the morning, scale it up. But don't reserve the compute for the whole time if you're only using it 1 hour a day for a very high peak. Put a budget, so before you start your project, calculate how much it would cost. Put that configured inside your cloud environment so you know if you're going over budget, and also alerting. So once you go over budget, you know that there's a cost impact. So analyze the resources. Now let's visualize that in a diagram. I won't go too long in the diagram because probably Brent will explain as well. But this is, for example, the solution we did for Serverpod. So we had both Serverpod as a backend running and also Flutter web as a static web app. So this is, for example, how we would implement this for a client. So we put everything inside a private network, and we're only exposing the application itself using the web application firewall. And then, for example, we are also pushing our code to Bitrise, which also does our mobile builds, but also does the build for our backend, and as well as the Flutter web app. And for the API, it's pushing the container. For the static web app, it's pushing it directly. If you have any questions about it, then you can always ask me. So thanks for listening. And then if you have any questions about cloud hosting, you can always contact me on LinkedIn, but you can also find more information about us at the A.C.A. group.be/cloud. So yeah. Thank you.